Hello and welcome to the Impact Webinar Series for February 2018. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Our session, Cultivating a Growth Mindset Within Your Organization and Mentoring Programs. We have a fantastic hour prepared for you of great discussion, resource sharing, and learning from one another. My name is Dan Horgan, Senior Director of Corporate Engagement at Mentor. Before we jump in and do introductions for our featured presenters, just want to review a few logistics with everyone. First, just to maintain the best quality of sound and the recording of today's session, all of our participants have been muted. However, that you can absolutely participate using the chat box, which is located on the right side of your screen. So at any point in time, feel free to submit questions or submit feedback based on the conversation. We're going to leave plenty of time at the end for some Q&A. And I'll be sure to be tracking those questions as we go throughout today's session and try to cover as many of those at the end as possible. We will be making the slides as well as a recording of today's session available after. So typically within 2 days, you'll receive an email alert that includes the link to where you can get the materials. And we also post it on the Mentor website, which is mentoring.org, under our webinar section for Impact Webinar Series. So again, today's session, Cultivating a Growth Mindset Within Your Organization and Mentoring Programs, is going to be divided into a couple different sections. We're going to start by digging into really what is growth mindset, so we all have a common understanding of it. We're going to move from there into understanding how we can develop a growth mindset at an organizational level, and then really pinpoint specifically how we can start to integrate it into our mentoring programs. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to end today with plenty of time for Q&A. So as I mentioned, my name is Dan Horgan. I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. I'm going to ask each of our featured presenters just to share a little bit of an introduction, and then they'll have more time later on in today's presentation to share more about their organization. But Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to kick us off with your introduction.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Hill. I am a program officer on the National Education Strategy at the Rakes Foundation. We're a family foundation based in Seattle, Washington. And I'm also our organization's lead on internal diversity, equity, and inclusion work.
Excellent. Thanks, Lindsay. Tasha, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. I am Tasha Booker. I'm the Executive Director for City Year Columbus. I've been in the role for about 3.5 years. I come from a teaching background, education, vocational education background, and you'll learn a little bit more about City Year, but we are in 28 cities across the country and 2 affiliates in UK and South Africa.
Awesome. Thanks, Tasha. And Jen Burgoyne from Mentor. Can I ask you to do your intro?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Burgoyne, and I'm a program manager here at Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. I've worked at Mentor for about 3 years now, and I support the development and delivery of resources to the mentoring field. So I take a look at what research says about mentoring relationships and help translate that into webinars, trainings, guides, and other resources that practitioners can easily use and incorporate into their programs. So thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Thank you all. So Lindsay, Tasha, and Jen, I'm super excited to have you guys as our presenters. We look at this work from a growth mindset from multiple different perspectives, from both a foundation point of view, as well as a practitioner's perspective with City Year, and then really supporting the larger mentoring field with Jen at Mentor. Before we jump into our conversation on growth mindset, I always like to just make sure we cover a little bit about who Mentor is as an organization, if you're not familiar with us. So Mentor is a national organization headquartered out of Boston, Massachusetts. We've been around for over 26 years. And I would say our core work really falls into 3 different buckets. One is we are constantly researching effective practices within the mentoring field to really understand, as new innovations come to the surface, what's working, how can we continue to drive greater performance within our mentoring programs to ultimately drive more impact for both the mentors and the mentees. We take that research and we apply it through our second bucket of work, which is our training and technical assistance, the ability to build capacity of mentoring programs across the country. And then third is really raise awareness both around the need for mentoring and the impact of mentoring programs, as well as advocate for additional support and resources and the inclusion of those elements of effective practice in the way that mentoring programs are implemented on the ground in communities across the country. We do this in partnership with lots and lots of organizations. So we have a national network of over 2,000 programs that we are working closely with, again, in terms of both learning from them as well as providing training and technical assistance to further elevate the field of mentoring. Some of those are highlighted on the screen, including City Year, which you're going to hear about again more today. We work also across the country with our affiliates. We have 25 state or regional affiliates that are serving as catalysts for the mentoring movement locally. And again, doing very similar work to what Mentor is doing nationally, helping to make sure the research on mentoring gets into the hands of practitioners, making sure that we're building the capacity of local mentoring programs, and really continually raising awareness so that we can improve both the quality and the quantity of mentoring across this country. We also work in partnership with not just practitioners, but the public-private sectors as well. And so on the screen, you'll see a sampling of some of those partnerships that we have in place, both to help develop these types of mentoring programs within corporations, as well as drive additional support for the mentoring field and learn from the investments of foundations in the mentoring space. We often are asked, to articulate what is the need for mentoring. We know from our most recent research that 1 in 3 young people are growing up without a mentor in America today. That's the mentoring gap that we're ultimately trying to close. We also recognize that very few of us have benefited from just one caring adult or one support system. And so when we think about the work that Mentor does, it's really about expanding the web of relationship support for young people across the country, so that no matter what supports they may be looking for, they've got this web of caring adults, web of relationships that they can lean on as guides, as support systems, as role models to help them navigate towards whatever goals they are setting for themselves. We know from our research as well, particularly a research report that we published about 1.5 years, 2 years ago called The Mentoring Effect, that mentoring does work. One of the most exciting parts of this research is that it was for the first time we went to youth that had been in mentoring relationships and asked them to specifically articulate the impact of those mentoring relationships. And what we found was what you see on the screen is it not only has an impact in terms of academic achievement and school attendance, it also has an opportunity to increase their connection to community, their engagement within their community, a strong sense of feeling like they're belonging to their community. They're more likely to take on leadership roles, both in school and outside of school. And my favorite finding from this research was that 90% of the respondents, 90% of the youth that were part of this research study said that they were interested in becoming mentors. So what's super exciting about that is when we think about that mentoring gap, if the young people that we're engaging in our mentoring program today continue to step up and serve as mentors to others, the rippling effect that we can have in making sure that every one of the young people growing up in America has a strong web of support, gets stronger and stronger with each young person that we're able to engage. So that is a little bit about Mentor. You can certainly learn much more about us at mentoring.org, which is our website. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into today's topic, which again is all about growth mindset. And to just make sure that we're all starting from the same understanding of what a growth mindset is, I'm going to turn it over to Jen and ask Jen to walk us through just some basic overview information about growth mindset and some of the early research that's been done on it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan. So like Dan said, I just want to start out with a basic framework of what growth mindset is to set the stage and make sure we're on the same page. So growth mindset is a concept that was pioneered by Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford University, and it's the belief that intelligence and talents are changeable instead of fixed, and they can be improved over time through practice, hard work, effective strategies, and input from others. So growth mindset posits that people aren't born smart or with a certain level of intelligence, but rather that intelligence is built and cultivated. I think this concept is pretty intuitive when it comes to physical fitness, right? When you go to the gym and slowly increase the number of weights you lift or the amount of time you do a plank, your body will gradually adjust and you'll improve. Growth mindset posits that intelligence and talents are the same. When you practice and you work hard, you can improve at anything. The opposite of having a growth mindset is having a fixed mindset. People who have a fixed mindset believe that yeah, you may be able to improve slightly through practice, but overall you're born with a certain level of intelligence, and that doesn't really change over time. So Carol Dweck's research and the research of others has found that young people who possess a growth mindset perform better in school, partly because they're more persistent with their effort and they're better equipped to respond positively to adversity in the learning process. And I'll kind of talk through what that means in a moment. But I think this diagram to the right nicely shows the pathway to higher achievement for students with a growth mindset. When students believe they can get smarter, they understand that effort makes them stronger, and they therefore put in extra time and effort, which leads to higher achievement. Then I wanted to briefly point out that research has also looked at a growth mindset of personality and it's found that youth who believe their social skills are improvable feel fewer social pressures, they have less aggression, less stress, they work harder to improve their relationships with others, and they handle conflict more easily because they recognize their adversary as being someone who's able to change and able to grow and improve. So having a growth mindset benefits young people in a host of different ways, both academically and personally. So here you can see some of the more tangible effects of having a growth or a fixed mindset and how a young person's mindset affects their behavior. Young people who have a fixed mindset tend to avoid challenges because they view challenges as evidence that they're not good at something. Whereas young people with a growth mindset view challenges as a way to work through issues and learn something new. Young people with a fixed mindset tend to give up more easily because they believe if they don't achieve quickly, then they're just not good at that subject. Young people with a growth mindset are more persistent during obstacles because they recognize obstacles as a way to learn and improve. Young people with a fixed mindset can view effort as fruitless because people are either naturally good or bad at school, and there's not much you can do to change that. Youth with a growth mindset see effort as a critical part to success. Young people with a fixed mindset view criticism as kind of validation that they aren't good at something, whereas young people with a growth mindset see criticism as helpful feedback to learn from. And then finally, young people with a fixed mindset are threatened by others' achievements, whereas young people with a growth mindset are inspired by others' success. So I want to do an activity now that kind of helps to demonstrate what growth mindset looks like in practice. And I want to first acknowledge Dr. Janet Hubach from Mentoring Works Washington, who taught me this exercise. So I'm going to ask a series of questions, and I want you to think about your answer. And if you're comfortable with it, feel free to write down your answer in the chat box and submit those in to me, and I'll read some of them out. So the first question here, I want you all to take a moment and think of one thing you would like to be able to do, but you currently think you can't. So it could be cooking a particular meal or running a certain distance, learning a new language. Take a moment, and if you're up for it, send me your answer. All right, we're getting a couple in here. Someone said complete one pull-up, juggle, learn Russian, run a marathon, learn Italian, lose weight, play the violin. These are all awesome. All right, those are some great examples of skills you'd like to learn. So the next question here, I want you to think of what you'd have to do to be good at that skill. What's a strategy that you can employ to be good at that skill? So maybe if you're trying to learn Russian, you might practice 10 new words every day or try to speak in Russian for an hour. Send me some strategies you'd employ to become good at that thing. All right, these are great. So someone said, go to the gym, start by running a 5K. So start with a smaller achievable goal and go up. Practice for 1 hour a day or watch people do it. That's a great one. Go on YouTube, watch some videos. Immerse myself in local groups and practice conversing in Russian. Those are all great. The next question here, think about how long you would need to work at that skill. to be good at it? Maybe it would take a day, maybe it would take a week, might take a decade. How long would it take you? Some good ones here. A year, forever, several years. These are great. And then the last question here, what kind of help would you want and how could you get it? All right. So some people would find a local expert. Someone would have an accountability or a running partner, pay a trainer. Those are all good examples. So thank you for participating in that. I think this exercise really demonstrates that you can improve at anything through practice, hard work, support from others, time, and effective strategies. So you've all established that you can have a growth mindset.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. So with that, I'm going to ask us to transition a little bit. Now that we've gotten grounded with Jen's explanation and some of the background context, including the last activity, and what growth mindset is all about, we're going to transition now to really thinking about how do we adopt an organizational growth mindset to really move our organizations forward. And so, Lindsay, I'm going to start with you and just ask you to share from your perspective and your experience, why is having an organizational growth mindset so important for organizations across all sectors?
Yeah, great question. And I'm happy to share both from the philanthropic perspective as well as what we're seeing in a lot of our incredible grantee partners on the ground. Just to kind of kick off with a little bit of framing, I'll talk a little bit first about how the Rakes Foundation came to be one of the primary foundations investing in growth mindset research. It was kind of a natural evolution of our education strategy where we were hoping to do a scan of the broader social emotional learning or non-cog or science of learning and development, whatever you call that field, which we all call very different things at times, to unpack what are the highest leverage focus points that influence young people's both academic achievement, but also their broader student outcomes, their ability to thrive as young adults, and then increasingly as adults as they enter our societies and leave our schools. And what we found, particularly by funding Carol Dweck specifically and in conversations with her, is that while growth mindset might seem really simple on the outset, it's actually not in terms of implementation. And a lot of what growth mindset pushes us to do, both in our work on the ground with young people, but also organizationally, is very counter to how many of us have engaged in the workplace and how we think about change in the education system more broadly. So we have been humbled to be pushed by partners like Carol Dweck to not just think of growth mindset as, telling a young person that their intelligence grows with effort, but really thinking more holistically about a series of practices and policies and mindsets that exist within organizations, within the education sector, within the out-of-school time sector and the mentoring sector, because that's where the real work will happen. So for us, in the last 2 years, we switched from running a request for proposals process as a foundation to a request for learning strategy. And what that means is that we are trying to position ourselves as a foundation alongside of our grantee partners as learners, and really hoping to minimize the risk of failure, because if we're all adopting a growth mindset, failure isn't necessarily a bad thing as long as we're learning something from it and we're applying that learning to future work. So that's one very concrete change we've made as a foundation, again, applying a request for learning strategy as opposed to just general request for proposals. And that's required that we partner with our grantees in really different ways. Instead of more stereotypical check-in between myself as a program officer and our leads and our grantee partners, where there's just a lot of kind of reporting on milestones that have been achieved, we're really asking our partners, what is it that you're learning on the ground? How is the research actually playing out in schools, in mentoring relationships, et cetera? and what can we learn as a foundation that will help us evolve our strategy and our future investments. So trying to have more of a two-way street, I would say, is one of the biggest changes we've made internally. And then in terms of what we're seeing with our grantee partners, a lot of our grantee partners are really turning to, again, people call it a lot of different things, whether it's continuous learning practices or improvement science. How can organizations really change their internal structures? Although, it wouldn't be fair to not acknowledge that some organizations have this built into the foundation of who they are. But really having organizations see themselves as continuous learning organizations. So what are the data collection processes that they have in place, not just to show progress to a funder or to a district partner or to a community partner, but specifically to advance their own work and to ensure that they're improving at the rate that our young people and our nation need them to improve at, and being humble about where we're not, necessarily knocking it out of the park, and how things like mindsets and bias and structural elements of oppression are actually playing out in our work. And so it's been really exciting to see a number of our grantee partners build in that continuous learning capability within their organization, whether that's building out a new team within the organization that's constantly looking at data and surfacing lessons from bright spots across their different regions and leaning into those to share best practices with more regions across their organizations, or organizations that have actually brought on a researcher role and embedded it on the ground so that researchers and the folks actually implementing and the work in practice are in constant conversation about what they're learning and making real-time tweaks, as opposed to waiting until the end of that year of programming or waiting until the end of that school year. So we've seen some really exciting shifts within our grantee partners that are really serious about growth mindset work, that it's not just kind of a message they believe they need to send to young people, but that they actually do need to make these internal structural changes to be more of an organization that supports growth mindset themselves, that they're constantly learning, tinkering, reevaluating, and they're seeing better results for young people at a faster rate as a result. The one thing I would say is this is not necessarily, testing on kids as guinea pigs. It's more those smaller tests of change that are coming up from folks on the ground. And again, leaning in and studying the bright spots within their own organizations to identify what those specific mentors or what those specific schools or organizations are doing that are leading to more positive results. So those are just a few examples, again, both at the philanthropic level and what we're seeing with some of our grantee partners.
That's great. Thanks, Lindsay. So I have a follow-up question. I love the concept of moving from a request for proposals to a request for learning. I'm curious, given that it's a fairly newer concept, and it's one that, when you push that out to potential grantees, I'm curious, what was the reaction like from the grantee partners that you communicated with?
It's a great question. Confusion definitely was
I'm sure.
number one reactions. And I think it speaks to, given the power dynamics within, between foundations and other philanthropic entities and the folks who are actually on the ground doing the work, we're stunting our ability to learn and grow as a field more broadly, because those power dynamics hold us back from having really honest conversations about what works and what doesn't. When organizations have to pretend that everything is perfect with a bow, wrapped up in a bow, then we're actually not surfacing the real issues that are holding us all back from achieving the results that we want to. So most certainly confusion was one of the first reactions, as well as, I think, a fear of actually pulling back the curtain and saying, here's what we don't have figured out yet, or here, actually, when we lean into our disaggregated data, which we asked everyone to do, we asked everyone to lean into their disaggregated data and to identify the subpopulation of young people that they serve least well. And I can guarantee you not one of the organizations responding to this request for learning had ever been asked that question by a foundation. And so creating the safe space for nonprofits to say, you know what, for us, it's Latina girls. And we don't know why that is, but we want to spend the next 3 years with you and with researchers and with technical assistance providers to unpack why that is and to make change faster, because this isn't us living out our mission as an organization. We can pretend we're perfect, but we're not. And so I think once people got past that initial shock of, gosh, you want us to pull up the hood and really show you what's happening underneath there and identify where we're not knocking it out of the park, that feels really uncomfortable. But I think as people have become more uncomfortable with it, it's actually pretty liberating.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to dig in a little bit deeper, but I'm going to turn to Jen real quick and ask Jen for you to share your perspective on really what does it take to adopt this growth mindset at an organizational level from your point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So most of the research Mentor looked at on growth mindset was about how growth mindset affects young people, but growth mindset can certainly influence adults' attitudes about their own intelligence and abilities as well. Just like young people, when adults understand they can improve, they're more apt to work harder to do so. So I want to give you an example of how having a growth mindset can affect someone's performance at work, which in turn can enhance an organization's performance and outputs. I have a colleague who isn't necessarily comfortable with public speaking, like many of us, and she wanted to improve in that area. She acknowledged that public speaking wasn't a strength of hers yet, so she began to take on more public speaking opportunities so she could practice. And she also sought after feedback from our colleagues. At one event in DC, she asked a colleague to videotape her performance and provide her with feedback on how she did, how she could improve, what were her strengths, what were the challenges. So my colleague didn't see public speaking as her strength, but she didn't think she was inherently bad at it and avoid it either. She just perceived it as something she'd like to improve, and she employed strategies to do so. So this helped her grow professionally, and it also helped the organization attend and be represented in more public events. And then for mentoring programs on the line, another benefit to adopting an organizational growth mindset is that it helps program staff understand growth mindset, and it demonstrates what growth mindset is for those who are working directly with mentors and mentees. Growth mindset can be a challenging concept to kind of wrap your head around, and so match support specialists and trainers may not initially be equipped to provide feedback about growth mindset or to readjust mentors' behavior when they're modeling a fixed mindset. Our pilot partners found that program staff may be better able to understand and practice growth mindset if its principles are really embedded within the organization's culture. We found that when staff and leadership and mentors all commit to modeling growth mindset on a day-to-day basis within the workplace, it becomes easier for individuals to translate growth mindset to the mentoring context. And I thought of a few ways that organizations can adopt a growth mindset. The first is assigning staff new and challenging opportunities where they can learn different skills and grow professionally. Supervisors can praise effort over accomplishments. They can discuss how mistakes are inevitable and something to learn from, and they can provide feedback and support throughout the process so employees can learn from it.
That's great. Thanks, Jen. So jumping over to Tasha, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit of context around City Year and as being a part of our growth mindset journey on creating the tools and resources, which we'll get into in a little bit. If you could share a little bit about how City Year has adopted this growth mindset at an organizational level.
Thank you, Dan. So many of you may already be familiar with City Year, but we are an education nonprofit that was founded in 1988 in Boston. And over the last 30 years, we will be celebrating our 30th anniversary. We have scaled to 28 cities, as I shared earlier, and 2 international affiliates in the UK and in South Africa with growth plans in the next decade to get to 40 or more cities. Our core members are serving in hundreds of high-need urban schools within 28 of our cities. They serve full-time as tutors, mentors, and role models to students who may be at risk. They are working with the teachers and principals to make sure that students at risk for falling off track actually get the academic and social-emotional supports they need to stay in school and on track. Core members use the real-time data and evidence-based interventions to identify and support students who are exhibiting one or more early warning indicators. So that means low attendance, poor behavior, and course failure in English and or math, and research shows that preventing or eliminating those early warning indicators actually triples the chance of a student at a high need school will actually graduate. So for us, being a entrepreneurial organization, we gather and analyze data, and we seek to continuously learn, as we learned earlier, from challenges and setbacks. So City Year has been committed to adopting a growth mindset approach to our work in schools, as well as at our headquarters, right? So it's been a cultural shift for us. For City Year, a growth mindset is an integral part of the key social-emotional skills our AmeriCorps members work to support in students every day, foundational skills that enable our students to succeed academically and later as adults. All of the skills we know that employers are looking for as we enter into the 21st century. Employers are really looking for those skills that aren't often taught at the schoolhouse space. Our partnership with Mentor, Reiki's Foundation, and PERT's Lab at Stanford on developing and piloting the growth mindset for mentors has only deepened and reinforced the importance of our growth mindset at all levels of City Year. Particularly, we've ramped up the trainings related to growth mindset to more of our frontline staff, so our impact management staff that work with the core every day in our schools. And we've done that over the last few years. So this year, we are scaling the growth mindset to all 3,000 core members will receive training in the growth mindset techniques and language so they can encourage their students to try new things, take academic risks, and grow in persistence and confidence. And we too engaged in this work as part of our continuous learning. We learned that before our AmeriCorps members can cultivate their growth mindset in the students they serve, they indeed must develop their own growth mindset. And that the year of service itself is an enormous opportunity to grapple with adversity, come up with innovative solutions to problems, work in teams, and persist through challenges. Again, going back to those 21st century skills that we need to develop within our students and within our young adults serving as core members. So in Columbus, we've been fortunate to serve in a district that had been committed to bolstering social emotional supports for students. At the same time, Columbus City Schools didn't have the capacity to offer trainings in the growth mindset. So they value City Year and the resources that we were able to offer to the students in this area. What we've learned is that growth mindset is most successful when there's buy-in from everyone at the school, including the district central office, right? So starting with the superintendent and those within his cabinet, the chief academic officer, and other executive directors managing learning and development at the district. It's not only specific to our classroom where our AmeriCorps members might be working most intensely and where the concept permeates the school culture. Future Ready Columbus is a public-private organization that was focused on a cradle-to-career approach to education and workforce development for opportunity youth in the Columbus area. It's also committed to social-emotional learning. We've been sharing what we've been learning about the growth mindset with this group as well. Several of our team members are serving on committees to develop the social-emotional learning that will not just serve Columbus City Schools, but other districts within the county and Central Ohio. Not just districts, but youth serving organizations. We've learned that the growth mindset is not a single tool, and we've heard that throughout this conversation, but rather it's an approach that's integrated through multiple partnerships that we have with school district community partners and other nonprofits. So we're very fortunate to have a very healthy nonprofit community that is starting to have conversations around the table so that we can speak common languages throughout our community. We'll ensure that growth mindset is a larger part of helping our students acquire foundational social emotional skills that'll enable them to succeed in school, career, and life.
That's great. Thanks, Sasha. So, Lindsay, I'm going to ask you just a follow-up question that sort of summarizes this section before we transition to the next, and that is, with the work that Rakes has done in terms of evolving things into like a request for learning and helping organizations develop more of a continual learning approach, I'm curious, have you seen a challenge with some organizations sort of moving in that direction, but still having to work in partnership with other philanthropic partners that maybe don't adopt that same type of mindset? How do they sort of balance that approach? Because I would imagine that could create some obstacles for them.
Yeah, great question. And that's not just true with philanthropic partners, but also with district partners, right? Because they have very specific contracts with their district partners that say, here are the 5 things we're going to do in this next year and the impact that you should expect. And so that kind of leaning into data and tinkering and making sure that they're applying their growth mindset and as an organization and continuously learning can be scary when there are contracts involved. So it's most certainly something that folks have been grappling with. And I think 2 things have been really important in the conversation. Number one, there are always the early adopter school partners, school districts, and foundations. So what we've encouraged our partners to do is don't do this across the board with literally all of your regions in 1 year. But can you find what we're calling in the Building Equitable Learning Environments network that we're supporting, find the early adopters, those folks who want to be more innovative, who want to be more flexible, who are ready for this kind of a conversation, both at the district and the foundation level. And those are the folks you engage as you start to implement some of these tests of change and make these pivots to your model. So that's one approach, starting with a smaller number of focal schools, really making sure that you're prototyping and piloting before you would go about making the larger changes that some foundations and districts might just not understand. I think the second piece is really helping folks identify the kinds of data that they need to collect, the kinds of new measures, frankly, that they need to develop in combination with researchers. Because for a lot of these things that we're talking about, we don't have great measures for them. So for example, there are some good measures, direct to student measures on whether or not they have a growth mindset or not. But in terms of teacher facing measures or climate measures that speak to whether or not a mentoring program or a school has a growth mindset culture, it's still a very nascent field in that regard. And so helping organizations identify how can you lean into some of these newer measures, actually develop new measures on your own, and then have a suite of other indicators of progress, be they GPA or increased attendance rates, or lower discipline rates, suspension rates, higher graduation rates, whatever they are. Helping folks think about a suite of measures and data that will show progress over time has been an important conversation to have with folks too, so that they can show foundations and district partners, look, by doing this, we are actually positioning ourselves to have greater impact overall.
That's great. I mean, those are 2 super helpful and very tangible steps that organizations could take. I especially like the first one around finding early adopters, and think that even beyond working across organizations, when we think about developing a growth mindset within our organizations, also finding those early adopters inside of our organization and then working to scale it across the entire team could be an effective strategy to deploy as well.
Exactly. Yeah, lean into the right spots there, because every organization has folks who are already operating with a growth mindset, mentors
right.
who are already doing this intuitively. And so finding those people, studying what they're doing, and then leveraging their learning from a peer-to-peer lens is one of the easiest strategies to implement.
And putting a spotlight on it, I think, to your point, if we identify it, we study it, we put a spotlight on the results of having that growth mindset and the impact that it's having, people sometimes are the non-early adopters will gravitate towards those who are finding success with a different strategy and start to become curious about how they could deploy that same strategy in their work, which just has the rippling effect both inside and outside of the organization. So that's great. So we're going to transition at this point. I'm going to turn it back over to Jen. And as we move from thinking about adopting a growth mindset at the organizational level to how we can nurture a growth mindset in our mentoring programs with mentors and mentees, I'm going to ask Jen if you can walk us through the next several slides and really giving us some tips and strategies for what we can do at a programmatic level.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dan. So like Dan said, I want to just discuss some practical strategies for how mentors can nurture growth mindset within the mentoring relationship. And all of the pointers that I'll be discussing on this slide come from the Growth Mindset for Mentors Toolkit, which Mentor developed in collaboration with PERTS and City Year with support from the Rakes Foundation. And I'll talk through how you can access this toolkit in a moment. So one of the most impactful ways that mentors can foster growth mindset is by modeling it in their matches. Mentees can really benefit from hearing about the way mentors approach challenges, how they emphasize effort and continuous improvement, and the strategies that they use for motivation. Mentors can demonstrate having a growth mindset by identifying something they'd like to improve upon over the course of the year in the mentoring relationship and talk to the mentee as the mentor works hard, as the mentor practices and faces challenges and overcomes those challenges. This is a really great opportunity for mentors to role model some key behaviors and show the value of growth mindset. One of the more direct ways mentors can help mentees adopt a growth mindset is by spending some time directly teaching mentees about growth mindset. Many studies show that people are more likely to develop a growth mindset when they learn about the scientific evidence for the brain's ability to rewire itself through practice. And I know that's kind of a difficult topic to tackle if you're not a scientist. So the Growth Mindset for Mentors Toolkit, which I'll be showing you in a moment, provides a bunch of age-appropriate resources, videos, and lessons for young people to learn about growth mindset. Another way to foster growth mindset is to reframe mistakes. For a lot of young people, mistakes can feel catastrophic, but we know that paying attention to and correcting our mistakes is actually one of the very best ways that our brains learn. Mentors can teach mentees that mistakes are actually essential and really valuable clues for learning. They provide feedback about what needs to be fixed. And then finally, mentors can use language that fosters growth mindset. On the side of your slide here, you can see a screenshot from the toolkit of language that demonstrates a growth mindset and some language that demonstrates a fixed mindset. When mentors say statements like, "It looks like that was too easy. Let's give you something a bit more challenging," and "This isn't the right answer. You don't understand it yet," it shows mentees that the goal is to be challenged and to improve over time, not necessarily to just get the right answer. And one of the growth mindset catchphrases that the toolkit recommends is the word "yet." So when a young person says, "I'm not good at the flute," the mentor can say the word "yet" to remind the young person that they can improve at anything over time. So these are just a few examples, but you can find many, many more examples of growth mindset language in the toolkit. So as I mentioned, the Growth Mindset for Mentors Toolkit was developed by Mentor in partnership with PERTS and City Year with support from the Rakes Foundation. The toolkit is a training for mentors on growth mindset, and it reviews what growth mindset is, what's the research behind it, how mentors can support growth mindset, and then it takes mentors through specific activities, language, and strategies that they can employ to foster growth mindset. The toolkit contains 17 short lessons that are all facilitated in different formats. Some are videos, some are text, some are learning exercise, and it only takes about an hour to review in full. All of the strategies and the language that I described on the previous slide come directly from this toolkit, and you can find the toolkit by going to Mentor's website, which is mentoring.org, and searching for Growth Mindset for Mentors Toolkit. And I'll also put it out via the chat box or the question box in a moment, so you can access it there. The toolkit was piloted by City Year in year one, and then it expanded to partner sites, Take Stock in Children, and Citizen Schools, who all asked their mentors to go through the toolkit and then supported mentors as they employed the toolkit strategies throughout the year. So while the toolkit is for mentors to learn about growth mindset, the growth mindset implementation guide is for mentoring practitioners. So probably a lot of folks on the line right now. And it offers recommendations for how mentoring programs can incorporate and implement the toolkit into their programs and support mentors in employing its strategies. So more specifically, it explores what staff roles would be needed to employ the toolkit. It examines timelines of when it could be implemented, and it discusses how to offer ongoing training and support throughout the year. I'll show you a couple examples of the implementation guide in a moment, but I also just wanted to mention that the implementation guide was developed based on the experiences of several national or regional programs that actually use the toolkit. So our 3 program partners, City Year, Citizen Schools, and Take Stock in Children, all provided feedback that informed this guide. And then also 2 organizations that use the toolkit outside of the formal pilot, Spark and Mentoring Works Washington. So they gave us a lot of great information about challenges they experienced while incorporating the toolkit and some kind of ways to overcome those challenges. And I just briefly wanted to show a couple examples of what the implementation guide contains. Here's a screenshot of the Kickoff Meeting agenda template, which outlines how mentoring programs can convene mentors after they've reviewed the toolkit and have them practice applying growth mindset to the mentoring match. So in this Kickoff Meeting, mentors watched the Carol Dweck TED Talk about growth mindset. They answer questions about what surprised them from the toolkit, and then they pair up to act out some common growth mindset situations. And here you can see an example of the match support section of the implementation guide. The elements of effective practice for mentoring recommends that programs check in with mentors at a minimum frequency of twice per month for the first month of the mentoring match and once a month thereafter. The guide recommends that programs include a couple questions about growth mindset into those regular check-ins to discuss how things are going and surface any challenging situations that might have arose about growth mindset. So those are just a couple of examples of what the implementation guide contains, but I really recommend both the toolkit and the implementation guide if you're thinking through how to incorporate growth mindset into your mentoring program, how to train mentors on growth mindset, and how to support them throughout the year. So I will send out a link to access both of those resources through your question box now.
Thanks, Jen. And Tasha, I'm going to turn back to you because as a partner both on the toolkit and the implementation guide, I'd love for you to share some of the lessons that you've learned on behalf of City Year as being a part of this project.
Thank you, Dan. So City Year piloted the Growth Mindset Toolkit over a 2-year period. We started with just 2 sites in 2015 and 2016, Columbus being one of them, then opened up the pilot to 10 sites in the next year, and then with full implementation across the network of all 28 sites in 2017 and 2018, and hence where we get the 3,000 core members all going through and headquarters staff all going through this training. So what we've learned, though, is that before our AmeriCorps members can even begin to talk about growth mindset in a schoolhouse space, we needed to make sure that we had healthy school partnerships and strong school-based City Year teams. And so if the district wasn't bought into this type of a model, because it's a cultural shift, we would not have been successful. And then we also needed to know when would be the best time to actually begin the growth mindset toolkit, because we didn't want to start at the first of the year where relationships we know are just forming. We learned that the growth mindset techniques are actually best leveraged during the middle of the school year, where those relationships are already established either by the core member or within the classroom and school environment. And we know that the toolkit is working by the multiple measures that we actually leverage. So improvements in the DESA, which is the Devereaux for Student Strengths Assessment, grades, attendance, and a survey or an assessment that we do in partnership with PAIR called the HSA. And so, we use that to make improvements upon how we're actually implementing the toolkit across the network. And then we learned that the work that we were doing was highlighted by what we've long believed, which is that all learning happens through relationships. That is so key to the toolkit actually working. It's not enough to walk through some of the questions and assessments if there's not a real, authentic, and organic relationship. So to complement the work we've done with the Growth Mindset Toolkit, we are now collaborating with Search Institute to support our AmeriCorps members in forming those developmental relationships with the students. So we are complementing our work with the Growth Mindset Toolkit with the Search Institute as well. We know that with those relationships even stronger, we will see the growth mindset tools will be more effectively used within the school environment in which we are serving. And so lastly, we know that when working with the toolkit, it's important to create time and space for reflection. So not just from a mentor standpoint, but also for the students to identify ways in which they see improvement and if there are areas in which they want to work on alongside their mentor.
Great, thanks, Tasha. So as we're getting ready to transition into the Q&A, but I want to ask Lindsay just a quick follow-up question. This is something that's been trending in the question box during the session, and that is, can you when you talk a lot about rakes and some of the practices that you all have adopted at your foundation, going back again to that request for learning and thinking about creating this continuous learning environment, how, if an organization is tuning in today and they want to start working on adopting a stronger growth mindset at their organizational level, what recommendations do you have for them in terms of getting started or facilitating training within their team to just get the ball moving in that direction?
Yeah, I think a few things. So there are the more technical steps to, again, becoming a continuous improvement organization or thinking about improvement science practices. And those most certainly will reinforce a growth mindset because they position all lessons as learning, even if it was a failure. But I think what we've really learned as a foundation, we've also made shifts within our research portfolio specifically, is we can't only think about growth mindset as direct to student messages and interventions and work. And I think this has been a theme on this webinar as well. There's a lot of work actually that needs to be done with adults who have fixed mindsets about their own abilities, right? You hear mentors saying, well, I'm not a math person. Well, that's most certainly a fixed mindset that they're sharing with mentees. And from my past experience, I won't name the organization, but I worked for a number of years in an out-of-school time organization focused on getting more young people to and through college, which included a scholarship as well as mentoring. And even within that organization, I would hear folks say, well, those kids aren't college bound, so we need to do this for them. And I think it's a much harder conversation for an organization to have about the fixed mindsets that adults within that organization, adults who are mentoring with that organization, have about specific young people or groups of young people. And so one of the ways we've shifted our research portfolio, to give you an example, is we no longer fund just direct to student interventions. And what I mean by that is, the toolkit, right? Or those kinds of things, but we're thinking more expansively on how can we support adults to shift their own mindsets? How can we do more research related to implicit biases and the impacts of structural oppression in systems like mentoring, like education? Because if we don't address those things, it actually doesn't matter what an adult says. One of my favorite examples, and I remember we were having dinner with Carol Dweck, and she said, "Gosh, I'm like not able to sleep at night because the teacher will think that they're promoting growth mindset because they tell a kid to try harder, but they don't let kids retake assessments. Their discipline policy is one strike and you're out. And nothing else reinforces a growth mindset for a young person. So I think really for any organization that wants to take this on, most certainly look into the direct-to-student interventions. They are good and they work, but there also needs to be a process both internally as an organization and then with your mentors where you're actually helping people surface where they have fixed mindsets, not just about their own abilities and their own kind of, how they're showing up, but also about specific populations of people. And it's something a lot of organizations don't want to talk about, but if we don't talk about it, then we're not actually going to have the impact that we want to. And also applying the principles of growth mindset to that. So we all have breathed in the same smog by growing up here or having professional careers here about, which types of people are capable and which ones aren't, which types of people are going to college and which aren't, and which types of people are more dangerous and which aren't. And so it's not necessarily that as we unpack these biases and conversations, folks need to feel guilt or shame or blame. But just like with anything else with the growth mindset, as we learn more about the history of oppression in our country and specifically how it then plays out in our education system and in our mentoring programs, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to do better. And so those are the kinds of conversations, in addition to building continuous improvement practices, that we're really pushing our grantees to do. And one concrete shift that we've made is that all of our grantees receive funding to do that kind of internal diversity, equity, and inclusion work on top of the funding that they receive to kind of do the quote unquote regular program work. Because if we're not actually having, again, the meaty conversations about what we actually believe about human potential and different groups' potential, then no matter what you say to a young person, they're going to know you actually have a fixed mindset about where they're headed or their communities, and that matters.
That's such great advice on so many different. You pack a lot into that, so I really appreciate that, because I think there's a lot of tangible takeaways that organizations and individuals running programs can really take away from the advice that you just shared. One final question, which has been a popular one as well, and I'm just going to ask us if we can be super brief in our recommendations, because we've got just about 2 minutes left, and that is, how do we start to measure the impact of adopting a growth mindset, either at the organizational level or within our mentoring programs? Any advice on where to start in terms of measuring impact?
So for City Year, it really was about a cultural shift, right? And so the language that we're using, I love the last comment about we are addressing bias and diversity, inclusion, and equity work with the same type of lens, right? And understanding that there are certain groups that this is not part of their language. And so when we introduced the pilot, it was as a cultural shift, not as another program or an add-on, but that it was like a tool in their tool belt, or a kitchen cabinet item that they could pull out and use. And so we are really measuring, one, I shared in the last section, we're looking at in grades, attendance, the DESA, all of the assessments, but it's really about how the rest of your organization is operating and the language that is being used within the organization. And you can very well measure that through, cultural surveys, through, retention surveys, et cetera.
That's great. Thanks, Tasha. So unfortunately, we're out of time, and so I know we didn't get to all of the questions. One of the final things that was trending, and there was lots of good energy around, was just wanting more access to training or additional growth mindset activities. And so I, again, would just strongly encourage you to check out the Growth Mindset Toolkit that Jen had posted the link to. There are, again, 17 different lessons featured for mentors within that toolkit. There's also sections in that particular website for parents and teachers regarding growth mindset. So it's additional resources that you can certainly leverage depending on your parent engagement and depending on whether you're a school-based program or working in partnerships with schools or districts that certainly might come into play as well. Additional resources that you can leverage from Mentor include an online community of practice for corporations and foundations to really, again, encourage this continual learning environment and sharing of best practices and innovations across the philanthropic sector. The Mentoring Connector is a database of national or local mentoring opportunities that you can search by zip code, by type of mentoring program. If your program is not currently in the Mentoring Connector, we would strongly encourage you to reach out to us and make sure we can walk you through the process of how you can get your program there in terms of helping with recruitment efforts. The National Mentoring Resource Center and our collaborative mentoring webinar series, as well as these impact webinar series, are all free resources that provide training, technical assistance, activities, as well as free consultations to help you really take your programs from where they are to the next level, with a particular focus on incorporating the elements of effective practice, which is our core 6 standards that we hold up for all mentoring programs. So I just want to say a huge, huge thank you to Lindsay, to Tasha, to Jen for being our featured presenters today, for sharing so much great advice and really tangible examples of how folks that are tuning in can take this work and really apply it to their organizations. We just skimmed the surface, I feel like. There's a lot more that we could have dug into even deeper. And so we would encourage you to continue this conversation at your own organizations and continue to look for ways to adopt the growth mindset organizationally and at your program level. So once again, thank you all so much for joining today. Again, in about 2 days, you'll get an email with the recording from today's session, including the slides, and we'll also post it on mentoring.org, our website, in case you want to reference it again. But thank you so much and have a great rest of the week, everyone. Take care.